Hi, my name's Simon from writteneaglenglish.com and welcome to this video where I'm going to walk you through an article that I blogged about a few weeks ago. The first thing to say is apologies for my voice. If I sound a little bit sketchy, it's because I've only just got my voice back after losing it for a few days. Hopefully I'll be able to keep it together for this video. As I said, on the 2nd of March, I posted on Facebook that there was this really important article that was written by Professor Kimble. And I said that you guys have really got to read it. There's lots of important stuff in there and that I would do a vlog about it, which is what I'm doing now. And in this vlog, I want to highlight the most important or some of the most important things that I want you to take away from the article. Okay, the first thing to say is that this is the testimony of a plain English expert. Professor Kimble is one of the godfathers of the plain English movement. He's written so much about it and done so much work to progress the idea and the use of plain English in modern legal writing today. So anything that he says, particularly within the context where he's speaking in favour of plain English, which is a little bit different to the articles and the books that he writes, in that it sounds more natural. It comes across a little bit more persuasively, perhaps. Particularly as he's speaking in front of the Joint Committee on Administrative Rules in an attempt to show them and persuade them that plain English should be used in legislative and regulatory writing. In this particular case, he looks at redrafting a barber's regulations or regulations about barbers. We'll have a look at that in more detail later on in this video. But there are some really important things apart from who is speaking, and that is things that perhaps you might not know, that there are 3 main organisations that promote the use of plain English. They work in slightly different ways, although they are very much connected underneath the umbrella of plain English. And these are Clarity, the Centre for Plain Language, and the Plain Language Association International. If you have a look below the video, you'll see links to those organisations. I strongly recommend that you click on the links and check out those web pages full of resources to help you develop your plain English skills and, of course, argue the case for using plain English in your legal or business writing. One huge piece of information from this article is that there is an attempt to introduce ISO certification to plain language. What does that mean? In a nutshell, it means that they are trying to certify the rules for what plain language is under the organization which issues ISO certifications. Now, this is huge because companies can then certify themselves against this ISO certification, assuming they meet the criteria or pass the tests. This is perhaps the first main classification of what plain English rules are. So companies can actually see objectively, are we doing this? No, we're not. Therefore, we must meet these standards. And if we meet these standards, we will be benefiting our readers and our clients. Because plain English, if there's one criticism of plain English, is that there's general acceptance of what the guidelines are and to improve your writing, but then there are some wishy-washy edges as well, some roughness around the edges. Some people say this, some people say that, and so it can be a bit confusing. And also there are many different sources saying do this, do that, and so on. So if you have a set of guidelines as to what plain English is and that you can meet those guidelines and you would get certification, this is a huge step forward to progressing the plain English course. So there's information about that in the article. And then there are 3 other things which I want to go into in a little bit more depth in this video. That is to say, the key point about what plain language is, example of a potential plain English redraft, and highlighting the use of you. Okay, so the key point about what plain language is the elementary point that very often we forget, because we think of guidelines. How do I do this? How do I do that? What is plain language? Am I doing it? But we forget the reason why we have to write in plain language in the first place. It says in the article, a communication is in plain language if its wording, structure and design are so clear that the intended audience can easily find the information they need, understand it and use it. The second point, plain language is reader-centered. It's not just about what the writer wants to say, it's about what the readers need. Clear, simple ideas which often get lost, and very naturally they get lost, because as we're writing, we're thinking, how I've got to include this, I've got to include that, I've got to communicate in this way, but we don't ask ourselves, is the reader going to be able to understand what it is that I'm writing? I always add an extra point here, that is to say, you want to write something in the way that the reader understands it, in the way that you want it to be understood. Now, if your writing is in plain English, you will get much closer to that point. There'll be much less room for misinterpretation or finding another focus in your writing. But it's always worth remembering those key points. It's that the communication is in plain language if its wording, structure and design are so clear that the intended audience can easily find the information they need, understand it and use it, and that it's reader-centered. I make no apologies for repeating that point again. So the second thing is an example of a potential plain English redraft. And you can see the original regulations about barbers and their general rules. And in the article, on one of the later pages of that article, you can see how Kimble would redraft this. And there are multiple plain English rules being used in this redraft, most notably tabulation, organization of ideas, emphasis, short sentences, subject, verb, object. You can see how many issues are being put into this redraft, that it's not just a simple thing. You've got to bear or think about lots of different things and apply those rules together. I just want to show you this to highlight the fact that this is not a simple thing to do. If you have a look at his article, you can see that there's a page in which he makes lots of handwritten notes. You can see the amount of thinking that goes into how to redraft this in a way that it makes sense to the reader. Once again, it's another issue that shows you that this is not an easy process. This is a learned process. There's lots of things you have to know before you have the skills to be able to redraft and write in plain English. But not to give up hope, but just to be aware that there are guidelines, to learn them and then apply them in your own writing. And the final point, which is highlighting the use of you, is one simple change which makes the world of difference. As he says here, you would work a sea change. In other words, there would be a huge difference if you started addressing the reader as you in regulations. More than any other single technique, using you pulls users into your document and makes it relevant to them. That is to say, when you're writing to someone, tell them, you have to do this. You might consider this. This might affect you in this particular way. Now, I was talking to a student of mine who's doing the course, who's doing my course on writtenlegalenglish.com, and we were having this discussion, and I was saying, you're redrafting, you're doing the exercises fantastically, but don't be afraid to talk to the reader directly, because that connection is really, really important. And then we had a discussion about how this might make lawyers a little bit uncomfortable, and that the passive voice or nominalizations or avoiding the use of you actually creates that bit of distance that perhaps makes the lawyer feel a bit safer in their writing. Granted, I take all of that on board, and there is always a context for you to think about that approach. But in many contexts, there is no need to defend yourself in your writing, and that in using you and communicating to the reader directly is something that makes the reader's life a lot easier, because then the reader can directly see how they are affected, what decisions they have to make, and perhaps how they should go forwards. And that's the importance of you, and it's really, really important, simple point that Kimble makes, but really difficult to apply in your writing. There are many other things that I could talk about that are in this article, but I wanted to give you some main take-home points to hopefully help break some of your habits and give you a new approach for your writing. When I said that this was such a difficult thing to do, it's difficult in the sense that you have to break habits, you have to do new things, and particularly when you're writing, this habit breaking approach, this application of plain language rules is really, really difficult, and you have to be brave. Of course you do, because then you're trying something new, but the benefits speak for themselves. So don't make sea changes to your writing right now. Introduce little changes, maybe some of the things that I've mentioned in this video, and introduce those changes step by step to make the reader's experience a much better experience. Thank you very much for watching this video. My voice managed to keep it together for this video. Please remember to go onto my website, writtenlegalenglish.com, click on the link for free legal English exercises. You'll find there loads and loads of different exercises that I'm uploading on a weekly basis. Plenty there to help you develop your vocabulary skills and hopefully learn some new skills in order to promote plain language ideas and plain language guidelines in your writing.